Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you would like to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. So in today's video I am going to be going through a segment of a panel discussion that Charlie Downs was on TalkTV, with Mark Dolan hosting and former Labour advisor Matthew Torbit joining in as well. Not going to go through the whole thing because I'm not interested in going through the whole thing. I just want to go through the parts where Charlie Downs is very much echoing points made by the online right for close to 7 years at this point. Certainly things developed over COVID where everyone went a bit mad, let's be fair here. And I see this once again as a problem because ultimately GB News and TalkTV, they basically have a list of about 4 Zoomers that they get on. Pretty much all of them are in the Zoomer WOF, and then you've got another one in Jess Gill. And frankly, none of these people really represent the Zoomer right, or certainly don't represent Zoomers that I personally know. In fact, the last Charlie Downs video I went through, there were a couple of Zoomers who were trolling the journalist, but effectively ended up saying they think what Charlie Downs had to say was very stupid, but used an R word instead. And so once again, this is more of a plea to the producers of TalkTV, who by the way have had Hugh Anthony on for segments before, and GB News. Please can you pick people who actually represent the Zoomer right to be on your shows, rather than these people who have absolutely no experience in life and all they can really say is the same 3 points over and over again, and end up effectively trying to mainstream mad ideas. It's not that these people should be blacklisted from going on, I'm not saying that. I am just saying, can you find people other than these 4 Zoomers who all say the same thing to come on these shows and actually talk about issues from a different perspective on the right, please?
Is this idea of Britain on breaking point, is that hyperbole? Is that over the top, Charlie?
No, I don't think it is. I think Britain's been at breaking point along a number of metrics for quite a long time, and this government's kind of limping along, maintaining the status quo, which is essentially a kind of managed decline. And this is why, as we were talking about before the break, there is such an appetite among every sector of society, really, for radicalism.
It's things like this that rather annoy me about Charlie Downs. His analysis is perfectly fine because it's the analysis that basically everyone on the right has had for over 10 years, so there's no real points for that. And then it basically jumps to him saying, oh, I think everyone actually wants radicalism. This is a problem I have with Charlie and an awful lot of people who, well, are in the online right circles. They very much confuse what the British public think with what's in their head and what they think. A big common through line with British history, and certainly English history, is we don't really like radicalism. There's a reason that Oliver Cromwell is not particularly seen as a good figure in history. There's a reason we just had Guy Fawkes Night and set off fireworks and burned effigies of him. British history largely is try to contain the radicalism. We didn't like full-blown communism. The way we have ended up with socialism is by bit over successive governments for 30 years. And now it's got to this point, it's people want anti-radicalism rather than radicalism. We live in the radical world. The problem with Charlie Downs is that he is conflating that with, well, ideas that have been spread around by the online right, specifically people like Academic Agent. I mean, we'll get into it and I will do a bit of a bio on him. But ultimately, Charlie Downs is a man, along with the rest of the Zoomer Waffen, who is very much being influenced by this section of the dork right. And I know there's going to be some people in the comments saying, yes, but this is a good thing though, isn't it? No, it's going to kill the right in the long run, and we're going to get Blairism back if we're not careful. Possibly something worse, actually, something more akin to Zach Polanski's Green Agenda. People just want a normal country. They don't want some esoteric, Everla-like super-fascism, and it's ridiculous to even think this. But this is ultimately the road that AA and, well, no, not AA necessarily, AA is just a massive grifter, certainly his followers want, and, well, one of them's quite clearly Charlie, as we'll get into.
Even those who have quite a comfortable life, I think that they're looking at the newspapers, they're looking at what's happening, perhaps not in their town, but in neighbouring towns, towns across the country, and they're looking at this, you know, the landscape that lies before them, and they're thinking, this is not a good situation, right?
Are we right?
Which, by the way, isn't radicalism. They are basically asking for a return to, well, the 1990s, post-Thatcher major timeline, maybe obviously early Blair before he got his proper Blair reforms in. You know, they're not asking to look for ideas that were being brewed about throughout Europe in the 1930s, which a few of you might think I'm being a bit ridiculous there, but no. As I say, when we get into later in this panel discussion, it all goes a bit mask off, and, well, I pay attention, so I would not be saying this if I didn't think there was truth to it.
Are we right to crave radicalism? Is it the answer?
Well, I think there is a time and place for radicalism. It's a style of politics that in certain periods of history is absolutely necessary.
1979?
Well, yes, indeed, right?
I mean, again, this is where the Mott and Bailey comes in. Oh, by radicalism, let me just clarify, you mean Margaret Thatcher, don't you? Yes, totally. Well, I mean, this is a man who, given he's happy to work under Rupert Lowe, clearly thinks that reform don't go far enough with what they say and promise, despite the fact that what they say and promise is far further than we've had from pretty much any party on, say, immigration. Well, probably ever. Indefinite leave to remain being removed is a rather large commitment, one that's never been done before because, well, the amount of immigrants we used to have wasn't really a problem if indefinite leave to remain existed, but now obviously you've got the Boris wave in, well, retroactively get rid of that because it's going to cause an awful lot of problems. If you want to call that radicalism, fair enough, but the problem is that it also, well, throws in quite a few ideas and people that I do not want to be involved with this, but they call themselves obviously radicals. And again, if you just want a normal country that was functioning similar to how it was functioning in, well, the only time post-war that Britain was working functionally, then yeah, I wouldn't particularly call that radical.
It's these situations where the ruling class has become so corrupt, so disconnected from the interests of ordinary people, that they require a complete clear-out. And I'm not just talking about the public-facing element of government there. I'm not just talking about the Commons. I'm talking about every level of the government, which seems to exist only to serve itself.
Now, this is the part where I started raising an eyebrow and wanted to listen to the whole thing. First, he channeled Jonathan Bowden, which I'm not a massive Bowden fan, but yes, the ruling elite class in Britain largely has either been useless or actually working against the British population, and so do need to have a either shift in direction or an actual shift in people. I am completely on board with that. It's just, again, when I hear clear them out or clear out, it's very much channeling Jonathan Bowden, who obviously was involved in the BNP, and while he had some good chats at pubs, was basically a man who, well, was probably too radical for the general public, hence he was in the BNP. But then he goes on to say that it's not just people in Parliament, it's basically everyone who's anywhere in the civil service, which, just to put it bluntly, it's not a particularly nuanced point, and, well, if you listen to someone like Dominic Cummings, you will know that there are actually people basically on the, let's call it the reform side of things, where things definitely need to change, and how we know that we've got them on board because every other week there's an announcement of someone else joining them, from the police service to prison service to even the Bank of England, who are quite happy to meet up with them to chat about quantitative easing and all that. Saying clear them all out, again, leans more towards AA than it does to, or academic agent I should say, than it does to Dominic Cummings, who I have issues with Dominic Cummings, but I will say he is a lot more nuanced on the problems that we have, and at the very least actually seems to have some reasonable way to improving the country, rather than just, yeah, clear them out, replace elites with who? I don't know, me, I guess. Anyway, a little later in the interview they get into one of the three topics that Charlie Downs is actually able to talk about, which is immigration, and has this to say.
Well, this is the point, right? The Labour Party, I agree with you that they're not exactly left-wing in the traditional sense. They're definitely not Marxist or socialist, right?
Yeah, they are. What are you talking about? Sorry, but we have the highest spending, highest tax ever, and they are upping both spending and tax. You know, a lot of people make the mistake of Marxism is just when you do things for the working class. No, Marxism is when you have a command economy and that also redistributes and rules in terms of some sort of class structure. It doesn't necessarily have to be upper working bourgeois whatever. This is James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson's whole point. You have neo-Marxism that also looks to rule in terms of, well, race, in terms of gender, etc, etc, etc. We do live in that world. Okay, they're not classical Marxists, fine. No one has been a classical Marxist for probably 40 years at this point. Margaret Thatcher literally killed that. She killed it because she actually managed to run a country that ended up with an inspiring working class that got loads of them to the middle class. My parents both came from families like that, by the way. So that point annoys me there because it runs cover for, well, people like Matthew Torbit, who is a socialist and frankly is in favour of about 70% of the things going on. And it also runs cover for what the problem actually is, which is, yes, postmodern neo-Marxism. It's still Marxism, it just doesn't use a classic class structure for its main lens. It uses intersectionality. And the Tories push that as well, by the way.
Constituency that the Labour Party serves is not the working class, it is the managerial class. These are people who work in the civil service, in university administration, in corporate HR and so on.
Is it people that...
Again, not quite. It's certainly a social status thing that comes into it. But it's not just the managerial class. I think that, again, it's an elite theory type thing. James Burnham certainly wrote about this quite frequently, and guess what? Academic Agent pushes it a lot. But it also serves non-managerial types, such as Kehinde Andrews, who was a lecturer at university and now is just a full-time activist. It serves an awful lot of media types who don't manage anything. They just report and publish fake news. It's not quite right to just say managerial class. The managerial class, believe it or not, manage the bureaucracy, but you can do that in a fascist way. If you slim the size of the managerial class, you can also do it in a relatively libertarian way, shockingly. So no, that's not what they serve. They serve the intersectional, I guess, intelligentsia class, who have people in the media, universities, and of course in Parliament and the civil service. The civil service is just the managing area of that. The universities aren't really managerial. They're the intelligentsia side of it. They're the people who write the doctrine, so to speak. This is another thing with Charlie Downs. He kind of knows the points, knows what he should say, but doesn't actually understand the theory top to bottom. A problem I have with elite theory is that, the only way you can actually fight this is by effectively taking over these institutions a la Gramsci, the long march through the institutions, which is kind of true, but also misses the point that actually there's quite a few righties still in these institutions. What you have to do, oddly enough, is, yes, make sure that they are better funded, make sure that you rug pull the people who are trying to undermine the whole country, cut the size of the civil service, as Reform want to do. Because I think people need to understand what my position actually is. Elite theory does have some good points. It does. I just think as a whole analysis, well, again, I've heard AA do this. Mott and Bailey's again, where basically every time you hear them talk about elite theory and push the ideas of it, it's pretty much, the masses can't do anything, populism is a delusion. Academic Agent literally wrote a book named that, by the way, and the only thing that matters is the elite. I don't buy that whatsoever, because we have seen in the past 10 years an awful lot of populism absolutely ruining the elite, to a point where it doesn't appear to actually support elite theory properly. What my position really is that elite theory all makes sense as long as it's within the Overton window of what the populace actually want. You can't force everything onto the populace. You can force things like, I guess, gay marriage and immigration to an extent on them, but immigration is breaking that apart. One thing that really threw a wrench in the works was the whole trans thing. That's all dead now, and you don't even hear Zach Polanski of the Greens talking about it. That's literally the populism defeating an elitist position. And it's also happening over in America, obviously, where we've seen two revolts from the populace with Donald Trump. And hell, if you want a really good example, just look at Nepal, where they overthrew the elite. There's that Zuma revolution, and they chose the next prime minister via a Discord vote. I suppose at this point I've talked about him enough. For those of you who don't know who Academic Agent is, his real name is Nima Parvini. That's hardly doxing at this point. He was a lecturer at the University of Surrey, where he lectured English. His expertise was the moral compass of Shakespeare and things like that. But since being fired for stupid things he said on the internet that, frankly, I didn't think were particularly fireable, I will defend AA there, he ended up leaning into his YouTube channel, trying to make his own academic agency where he sells courses for a ridiculous amount of money that I have literally seen absolutely no evidence whatsoever it actually boosts your CV in any way. Obviously, he is a massive pusher of elite theory, writing books such as The Popular Delusion and The Prophets of Doom. As far as I can tell, I have read excerpts of both books. Effectively, it's just here's what a philosopher in the past has said here's how I can link it possibly to something that's happening in the present, and adding very little analysis beyond that. But, well, if it's for you, it's for you, I guess. But obviously he's had the attention of Hope Not Hate, and again, a thing everyone needs to understand with Hope Not Hate is that they don't typically fabricate information. What they do is have the least charitable interpretations that they can on some points. The problem with AA is that it's not very difficult to actually, well, see those less charitable interpretations as somewhat convincing. Hope Not Hate obviously see him as extreme. He is a disgraced academic who called black people impulsive and low IQ. Again, AA actually did that, and again, it's hard to really defend him saying that, so I'm not going to bother. He also said he has also spoken admiringly of Nazi brown shirts. Again, true. The problem you have is that Hope Not Hate actually do have a massive collection of all your tweets, even from deleted accounts if you are quite large. So academic agents just screwed. Having said this, he does actually work in universities with Eric Kaufman, and I imagine he's got in by saying, oh, that's Hope Not Hate, they just lie about everything. No, they don't. I'm afraid they don't. The group also states that he has a large international following and has spoken at a range of conferences, including the Traditional Britain Group in 22 and 23, Nomos in London, God, don't go to Nomos, alongside Colin Robertson, Millennial Woes, and Shieldings alongside Carl Benjamin and Curtis Yarvin. Curtis and Sargon aren't actually racists. I don't really admire either of them, to be honest. Millennial Woes is an open white nationalist, though. And AA is very much within those circles. When he started going in towards those circles, that's around the time I stopped following him, because I didn't think they had an awful lot to say back then. And these days, I certainly don't think that they have anything to say whatsoever, because the few things that maybe they had a point on are pretty much already mainstream. So, there we go. Anyway, the whole point of going through that is to say that this is really the start of the section where Charlie quite literally starts just bleating word for word what Academic Agent has said on Twitter, in his streams, and on his videos. Again, I used to be a bit of an avid follower, and when he started going into elite theory and I started seeing him go a bit wobbly in his analysis, that's when I, well, gave up on him. And, well, Charlie Downs seems to just exist at this point to try and mainstream some of those points. I don't particularly want people on the right to do that because I think they're silly points, and I think in the long term it's going to kill the right. So let's go through them anyway.
Indeed. And so that is the class that the Labour Party is the political wing of, right? And those policies that you have just talked about, whether it's net zero, legal and illegal immigration, or any other kind of globalist policy, essentially, benefits them because it expands their power. It makes them more necessary because mass and scale, a society of mass and scale, like our own, requires managerial power.
Again, this is the part of the elite theory I really don't have much problem with. Yeah, the incentives of power is to expand your own power. And the problem we have with MPs these days is that they really don't have much power, and all they're really in it for is to effectively make money. And this is why, after being an MP, being a minister, what have you, you have people like Matt Hancock who basically make their money through book sales and tours and speaking events they're paid an awful lot of money for. It's the incentive to basically keep people in Parliament that are basically willing to be there to just bleat whatever the civil service tell them to bleat. As, well, as Dominic Cummings points out, these people are literally given scripts to recite off of when it comes to cabinet meetings. And I have to say, in defence of some of the backbench MPs in Labour who are rebelling, they are very much against that sort of thing, because it's quite clear that the civil service have realised, oh god, we've gone too far and we're going to kill the country because our finances are screwed. The backbenchers somehow have made the worst decision there of saying, what do you mean? We can just tax people more, and why do you have to if you're only spending $5 billion more when it comes to some spending increases? So ironically, they're going against the managerial class. What's actually happened is that in the Uniparty, as soon as you get to some sort of ministerial position, you're kind of locked in place, and, you know, people like Robert Jenrick were even captured, along with Suella Braverman, who basically didn't do anything. Despite saying that they did everything in their power to try and avoid that. Well, they didn't, because they didn't use their parliamentary privilege to say, oh, by the way, we've brought 100,000 Afghans over. What's the point of that? Because, frankly, they are in a party that is going to be their career for the rest of their lives, and they don't want to spoil that gravy train. This is why you can largely trust Tory MPs that are moving over to Reform, by the way, because they are leaving what probably will be still for another 10 years or so a gravy train.
and so it's in their interest to...
And it makes them look like nice people. It allows them to virtue signal with their luxury beliefs.
That's the window dressing for sure. But you know,
I don't actually think that's the window dressing. I think that's literally why they do it. They do it to virtue signal. I think it's got out of hand. Why? I mean, why do people do anything to feel good about themselves? What makes people feel good about themselves? Doing things they think are morally correct. You know, you get the odd sociopath or psychopath who doesn't follow incentives like that and just basically rely on instinct, I guess. But no, these people genuinely think that they are fighting some massive war for, well, for the moral... I'd love to know what Charlie Downs' alternative is to this, to be honest.
It's, you know, you hear our leaders talk all the time about growth. You know, growth is always the most important thing. And wealth, the generation of wealth, is absolutely important. But you listen to how our leaders talk about the economy, it's just GDP. It's just the kind of, you know, the net amount of money that is being, you know, sort of, you know, the size of the economy itself that's important, and not the actual GDP per capita.
Okay, it was all over the place there, but I agree with the point that he finally landed on. The start of that sentence made it sound like, oh, growth doesn't really matter, and then he ended up saying, oh, growth does matter, it's just got to be GDP per capita rather than GDP. Yeah, true, we're in a GDP per capita recession at the moment, by the way. That's why there are a whole load of recession indicators absolutely everywhere, and I don't think this budget's going to help.
Not the well-being of ordinary people on a day-to-day basis. And that's because their view of the country is not as a nation, as a homeland, but as an economic zone that they have to optimise for profit.
Sort of. I think that's kind of wrong, though, because I think these people do see it as a homeland. I just think that they don't particularly like the people who it is the homeland of. Again, I've talked to people in the civil service a fair bit, and effectively, they do have this attitude of, we just hate the population of Britain. I've had about 5 different sources basically say the same thing on that. Civil servants genuinely see themselves as some sort of elite, and I suppose they are, but there's this attitude that clearly spreads around in it where they think we are above the rest of the population, and them voting wrong is because they're idiots, morons, and basically don't understand the project. And I don't think that's true. I think the general public have got a whiff of what the project is and are voting for people who are promising to break that down, i.e. reform, and even the Greens, shockingly, because people voting Green who are die-hard communists basically see the civil service of people that are basically kowtowing to capital. To an extent they are, because they will just do as multinationals want them to do, because that's where an awful lot of the income comes from, at the expense of small and medium enterprise in Britain itself, largely run and set up by British people. But again, this is another kind of dork talking point where, oh, the elites just see it as an economic zone. No, I don't quite see it like that. If they saw it as an economic zone, they would absolutely make it a free market. I don't think they see it like that. And also, if they saw it as just an economic zone, they would not be wasting the millions, billions in fact, and billions of pounds on illegal migration nonsense. They get out, unironically, they get out of the ECHR. That is what they do, because it is a massive waste of money. But no, they're not doing that, because I don't think the economic zone's really what they see Britain as. I think they see it as something that basically needs to be destroyed and replaced with, well, post-Blair moralism, effectively.
Forgetting that growth is finite as well, and the idea that we can just grow forever.
Absolutely.
And we're just going to continue along this path.
Sorry, but right-wingers should not be agreeing with that. Theoretically, growth can actually be infinite on a large enough timescale, because not all of our economic output is based on goods. An awful lot of it is based on services, especially in Britain at the moment. It's actually our problem, to be honest with you. We basically only have a financial sector that is working at the moment, and Labour are doing their best to cripple that. But even on top of that, as soon as we actually crack getting resources from asteroids and other planets, you've basically cracked what may as well be infinite growth. And then when you can actually leave the solar system, damn, you're on another level there, aren't you? The point here is that this opens the door to what the Greens have been pushing, which is for degrowth, because, oh, growth's impossible and we've pretty much gone past the peak, so we may as well just let the country slowly deteriorate. No, sorry. Anglo-futurists annoy me because they are not clear about what they actually want beyond the tech sector should run Britain, but they are correct that actually you should not be even entertaining the idea that, growth isn't limitless. Of course it is. In a technical sense, maybe not, but by any real sense, compared to the population that we are probably going to have in 100 years, it may as well be.
Well, I've got to say, I think this does actually call into question the value of the concept of social mobility, right? And I sound like a proper Tory saying that, and I'm not a Tory, right?
I'm not being funny, but again, I have multiple videos on this. You might not be a Tory officially, but it's quite obvious that you, with Rupert Lowe and the whole team, are very much trying to get in with the Tories. Very happy to have them on board with literally everything that you are working on. So, what can I say?
But honestly, historically, this country and all nations around the world have felt there's been a sense of cohesion and belonging and identity because everybody had a place. Everybody had a place where they belong. And today, this on the altar of social mobility, young people certainly go through the education system. They're told they have to go to university if they want to have any prospects in life. They do that, and then there's rarely actually a job for them that uses their degree. And actually, they end up going into whether it is some office job that they don't feel that passionate about, and that they're just working to pay the bills, for which they get excessively taxed at the end of the day.
Again, a lot of Marxism wriggling his way into this. He's not wrong. You are railroaded up until the age of 21, and then you're just told, right, big wide world out there, do what you can, which you're not particularly prepared for, and an awful lot of people can get away with not having Saturday jobs. Some of the people I know who did best when it came to post-uni work are people who had Saturday jobs or morning newspaper rounds. I was not one of those people, by the way. But this idea that kids of today, oh god, I'm nearly 30, but that graduates are going into a job market where they don't feel particularly passionate about their work. I'm not being funny, but there's not really been a point in time that I know of where generally people were passionate about their work. Go back to medieval times, your average peasant was working on a field because he had to eat. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, there were people whose jobs it was just to literally pull a lever up and down in motion. That was also happening up until the 70s in some areas, before automation really kicked off properly in factories. My mum and dad don't exactly talk about how much they were passionate about working for the gas board. I don't understand why there's this massive push by an awful lot of Zoomers that, I don't really feel passionate about my work. Yeah, not a lot of people really do. The point is that you have a passion for either your family or your hobbies or whatever, and you work to fund them. That's the point. And I should consider myself quite lucky, but because I am somewhat passionate about my work, genuinely. But do you know how long it took me to find that? It took me probably 6 years in the field. And I'm not being funny, with the way things are going, I'm probably going to be forced to change job at some point soon and then go into something I really don't care about. That's just life, and I really don't think enough Zoomers have been told that, yeah, life's unfair, how didn't you work this out?
What has social mobility, this high-minded idea, actually delivered for people? Well, it's been deindustrialisation, for one thing. It's been
You sure that's Tony Blair you can blame for that? But again, I don't see how industrialisation really helps the point you just made there. Industrialisation you keep for, growth, which you both just had a problem with, by the way.
Transformation of our economy into one based on services, which I think has completely sucked the soul out of this nation. It's meant that work has no dignity anymore.
Sorry, but again, one of my friends told me that his dad's job, it might have been his granddad's job, was at a Cadbury's chocolate factory, which obviously you may think, Roald Dahl, that sounds great. His entire job was lifting a lever up and down as the chocolates came through. I think to put the walnut on the top of a walnut and whip or something like that. I don't even think they're Cadbury's, but you get the point. It's not exactly dignified work. I'm sorry, but this is something that can really only be said by someone who has not worked a proper job in their life, which, by the way, Charlie Downs hasn't. His entire professional career has been whinging about things on camera, and I'm not even joking about that. He doesn't have a background in any particular profession. Same with Connor Tomlinson, by the way. His background was think tank to move on to be political commentator. And there's a reason then that these two just share all the opinions, because they basically are right-wing NPCs. And the reason I keep going on about these two, along with others like Harrison Pitt, is that they're going to kill the right in the same way that Corbynistas have killed the left. They can't engage any topic without trying to force it into preconceived notions that they already have and then talk about that for 20 minutes. The other problem is that they basically agree with Aaron Bastani and have Marxism settled into their brain somewhere, because absolutely everyone who doesn't concentrate on what they actually think does, but are just anti-Islam, along with, to a much lesser extent it has to be said, pro-white British about the whole thing, to the point where they are... all they can really say is, how can I say something that will get people on the side of getting rid of all the foreigners now? Which, again, normies don't want to get rid of all the foreigners. They want to get rid of the problem ones, which is still going to leave like the country at 85 to 90% white British. And guess what? People are happy with that.
And therefore people feel this kind of driftlessness.
Well, it's a very complex question as to why a lot of Zoomers to very late millennials such as myself are feeling driftless. And my God, the new cohort just coming out of uni, they've been given the brunt end of the stick. 1.2 million people graduated this year. The job market's had 17,000 grad schemes going on. That is an absolutely absurd ratio of graduates to the job openings that they can get. The driftlessness isn't really the fact that they're getting office jobs. The problem is that they're having trouble getting jobs. 40% of people under 30 are on some sort of disability benefit. Sorry, the problem is that there's not enough jobs. It's not that they're getting office jobs. People I know with office jobs tend to be, well, rather happy because they feel like they have some purpose in life. Again, this is something that can only be said by someone who's never had a proper job. Anyway, the conversation moves on to Reform cementing itself as the new right-wing party and how it does seem to be accruing a fair amount of talent.
It is certainly an interesting one. I mean, I worry that Reform are getting a little bit complacent because of their, their domination of the polls.
It's time for Haryan to go into his pro-Reform propaganda mode. Sorry, but this is just absolutely ridiculous. Just to make it very clear, this is a clip from about a week ago. It was 1st of November, so last Saturday. This was made on the week that they had three separate press conferences, one about the grooming gangs, one about what they're going to do to the civil service, how they're going to get rid of a load of office space they don't need, make sure that the civil servants follow what ministers want rather than the other way round, etc. And of course, having a go about PIP, because it does seem to be given out to an awful lot of people who don't need it. Not that there aren't people who do need it. They are going to make sure that people, obviously, who need it will still get it. Saying they're complacent to me is you're just not paying attention, and you literally are just on a kind of NPC brain. Here's the lines I need to bleat about Reform, and guess who also says this? Oh, a lot of the dork right, including AA.
And I was listening to Peter Hitchens yesterday, who said that he thinks that Farage, now that he's staring at the prospect of actual power, is actually possibly feeling a little bit scared. Now,
Yeah, I stopped bothering listening to Peter Hitchens some time ago, to be honest. Peter Hitchens, again, just another NPC where it's nothing can ever get better, it's all going to get worse, blah, blah, blah. I don't have time for these people anymore. If Reform screw up, I'm moving country. There you go, that's my backup plan. That's what Peter Hitchens suggested anyway. For now, I'd rather hold out hope that Britain can actually resurrect from the ashes, but there we go.
I don't know Farage. I've met him a couple of times. I don't know whether that's the case. I can believe that, though.
Yeah, anyone can believe that. If you actually listen to Farage, though, it's very unlikely. There was the Bloomberg interview the other day where he was asked, well, what do you read? And he said, oh, here's a load of things about how small states can succeed and how you can get states back from the brink. Like, clearly he's taking this seriously. And obviously the Bloomberg lady basically said, what about fiction? Why don't you read things for entertainment? And it's because, well, as she ended up saying, it's because he's doing homework to be Prime Minister, from the looks of it. So I can believe it, but I don't believe it, I suppose, is my position. But this is a talking point thrown around by, again, people like AA and a lot of the dork right. Oh, he's a campaigner, he doesn't really want this. That might all be true, but their point is that he's really putting Zia Yusuf in a position to take over from him as soon as they win the election. I don't buy that, by the way. I think Zia Yusuf's going to be in the cabinet somewhere, but I don't think that he's going to be Prime Minister in the next Parliament. I think unless Nigel Farage, the worst happens to him, let's say, something like that, then maybe. But no, Farage, I don't see why he wouldn't be putting his mind into, I am going to be Prime Minister for 5 years, let's work on that. And then when you read between the lines or what you're reading at the moment, things like that, dead giveaway he's serious about that.
And I think that the style of politics that Reform represents is certainly appealing at one level, but I don't know whether they recognise the gravity of the situation that this country is in. I see no evidence from them that they're working seriously on policy, on building a kind of, an elite vanguard that can save the country and take on the civil service.
Yeah, it was at this point I went, oh, he's just bleating AA. This is really what made me want to make this video. And yeah, I know it's half an hour in, but welcome to the Haryan Gláeddyv channel. The elite vanguard is something that AA has been saying for nigh on 5-6 years, something like that. Again, this is sort of where I tapped out. He had this whole idea of making a network of tens. When asked what the hell's a network of tens, it's basically just, oh, people we kind of know, but they read a bit more. Again, there's no serious thought behind this. All it basically means is people we like who are very competent. To say that he sees no evidence that they're taking policy seriously or that they're making an elite vanguard, what he actually means by that is they're not getting me or my friends on board. And in fact, the other day, Connor Tomlinson was told that he's blacklisted from speaking at reform events, which a lot of people on the dork right have taken issue to. I'm perfectly fine with the reform doing that. They can blacklist people who constantly counter-signal them in ridiculously stupid ways, and obviously I wouldn't be shocked if Charlie's actually blacklisted as well, but he's not been told clearly, or at least he's not made it public if he does know. As far as I'm aware, he's actually still a member of Reform, by the way. But it's because they just bleat these stupid things. Oh, Reform just aren't serious, they're not doing things, they don't understand the gravity of the situation. Sorry, but we're getting 2 or 3 press conferences a week from them about what their ideas are, about what policy they're developing, about the people they're getting on board, about what their plan is when they get into number 10. We have a good idea of what they're going to do, and it's effectively a bunch of Thatcherite supply-side reforms, get the prison and the police service fit for purpose as quickly as they can, leave the ECHR and work on a Great Repeal Act to get rid of a whole load of Blairite nonsense. Basically, all that Charlie Downs and all his friends have a problem with is that they've been relegated to working with Rupert Lowe, who's trying to get involved with the Tories now. That's what their problem is. They're not involved with reform. This is what a lot of people have take issue with reform. They start having a go at them basically because they've not been invited to the party. And a big reason for that is because, well, reform aren't stupid and understand that these people are actually not fit for purpose to actually seriously develop policy. That's why absolutely nobody cares about Restore Britain's mass deportation policy, by the way. Literally not heard anyone talk about that, apart from obviously people who wrote it.
In a lot of ways, the very fact that Reform and Farage are being put before the electorate suggests a certain degree of acceptance by the establishment, in my view. Because if they were a genuinely radical offering, same goes for Polanski, by the way, any genuinely radical offering is not given the time of day.
This is an absolutely absurd thing to say when you are the head of campaigns at Restore Britain that is being accepted as we speak by an awful lot of Tory party MPs. Rupert Lowe, this guy, yeah, he's totally the guy who's going to be a massive radical. That's effectively what he's trying to say here, while he's literally being accepted by the Tory party. He got a Tory party seat on a select committee the other week, for God's sake. Again, this is just bleating an academic agent point to try and mainstream these ideas, but these ideas are phenomenally stupid. We have seen people who offer completely different solutions be put to the electorate, get voted in, and completely change the country over the 10-year period they were in. Margaret Thatcher I'm obviously talking about. And she was very much not on the side of the leftist establishment managerial elite that you were talking about. She actually... You listen to Lord Monckton, I think it was, or it might have been John Redwood, I can't remember now, talking about how they actually worked with the civil service. Effectively what they did was, right, this minister, you have to go through him to have your plans within the civil service approved when it comes to funding. And he rejected so many that they actually stopped bothering doing it unless they thought it was genuinely a good idea. That is keeping the managerial elite on a leash. You obviously can fight it. It's obviously harder now because of 30 years of, well, them making sure that they have better defences this time around. But honestly, the problem that a lot of these Western European countries have that have similar issues, such as Germany, is that when they try and explicitly take down these right-wing parties, like they've done in France, like they've tried to do in Germany, it's, well, it causes a bit of an uprising and a lot of upset that seems to only strengthen them. That's probably why you're not seeing it here, because it would be it'd be a little bit too on the nose. Plus, Farage is very good at delving and weaving his way through the traps that they set for him. Other people not so much, like Sarah Poachin, but, you know, they're going to give them plenty of chances. Took 25 to 30 years for Farage to hone that instinct, and, well, he's very good at it. Along with Zia Youssef, oddly enough, and Richard Tice, of course. But these traps are still set for them. But back to the point, yeah, the idea that if you manage to get on the mainstream in any way, that means that there is an acceptance from the elite of you, that's just absurd. Sorry, Sorry, Charlie, but that makes you compromised. You've basically just admitted that by putting that point forward and believing it.
Well, Farage has said he'll stop the boats within 2 weeks of entering office.
I think that's entirely possible.
He wouldn't
but
make
once again,
but that's radical, isn't it?
it is radical.
Again, I just completely dismiss this whole idea of it being radical. It might be radical to the establishment, who obviously don't want to stop the boats. We've seen that for quite some time. But I suppose the main point of this is Mark has just absolutely eviscerated Charlie's point. Sorry, but you're saying that they're not really radical because there's some mainstream acceptance because they got onto the Electoral Commission's register. Are you kidding me? I mean, the English Democrats and UKIP are on there. UKIP being massive Christian nationalists and trying to claim that they're not ethno-nationalists while copying all their talking points. And they are ridiculously anti-Muslim. So it's quite ridiculous to say that, oh, the Electoral Commission, yeah, they gatekeep true radicals. Sorry, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. And it'd take 2 seconds for any centre-righty who's vaguely aware of what's going on to trip you up on it, as Mark has just done. Sorry, but the point needs to be made again. One thing I'm getting really fed up of is Zoomers and young millennial righties being put on all these shows by producers, despite the fact that they are clearly stupid. I'm fed up of it. Can we have smarter people on, please? They're out there. They exist. I appreciate that a lot of them are anons, but ultimately, I'm very bored of these incredibly predictable people.
But stopping the boat, I mean, everybody knows that stopping the boats is a pretty straightforward thing. I mean, we published a policy paper a couple of weeks ago at Restore Britain titled Mass Deportations, Legitimacy, Legality and Logistics. And I'd encourage all viewers to go and check that out. Because
no, I'm not going to bother because it's not going to be picked up by anyone. There's no point. Why would I read something that's not going to be implemented? This is why I find it much more interesting to see what Reform are actually saying, because literally everyone understands that there is a 90-odd% chance that whatever they say is going to be implemented. Restore throws something out and they get a few PR pictures with Rupert Lowe and what have you, send him a script to read off because he's barely actually involved in it, and that to them is about as legitimate as they can get. Because, yeah, a load of Tories keep signing that they're on board with mass deportations, and then they do a load of things that, well, the mass deportation lot won't like, such as Bob Blackman inviting a load of Indians in his constituency to Parliament to celebrate Modi's birthday. Sorry, but nobody cares that you wrote an 100-page policy paper. I don't even know who's read it. I don't think anyone in the mainstream's read it or cares, and there's just no interest at all on this panel about it. Just watch what happens.
It's a comprehensive plan on how to stop the boats and also how to remove all of those living in Britain illegally, of whom there are about 2 million. That's the easy part. The hard part, as I've said already on the show today, Mark, is legal migration and the comprehensive transformation of our legal and political infrastructure in this country that's going to require to resolve and reverse that particular axis of chaos that's being inflicted on our country is going to be far more complicated. And the legal challenges and all the rest of it is going to be so difficult. And I don't know whether any party has the stones to actually deal with that head on.
So part of the reason that Charlie Downs instantly switched from, anyway, that's all we have to say on illegal migration, now on to legal, is because he doesn't really want... He probably doesn't even know what's in the paper, to be honest with you, so he doesn't want to be asked questions on it. Anyway, apparently it's easy to just get rid of 2 million people from Britain. I mean, America's barely even managing that, by the way. I mean, don't get me wrong, I am obviously supportive of the deportations that they have done so far, apart from obviously the people that they've mistakenly deported who shouldn't have been deported, obviously, but mistakes like this are going to be made. And they've also shut down the border, but they're nowhere near the target that they said they would be at. And there's no, I'm sorry, there's a reason that Reform have said, yeah, about 600,000 we think is a reasonable estimate, because obviously over 5 years you should be able to get rid of 120,000 people a year. That seems eminently reasonable. Trying to go for 2 million, I mean, it's ambitious, don't get me wrong, but realistically, I mean, already you're estimating it's 2 million. We don't even know. Could be way more, could be way less. How are you going to capture these people? You know, we don't even have a prison system that works. How are you going to keep them under control? You don't have what America largely has, which is a very punitive and absolutely massive prison service. Over here in Britain, ours is falling apart. You need to invest a lot of time and money before you actually get to the point where you're deporting people. Really, I think you're going to ramp up all the deportations at the end of the Reform Parliament rather than have 120 a year, 120,000 a year. It's going to be more like, I don't know, 50,000 in the first year, maybe 70,000 second year, and then it's going to ramp up to like 300,000 in the final year. Again, there's a reason that nobody's taken their policy seriously. Do you hear Tories talking about it? No. Do you hear Reform even trying to get on board with it? No, but that's largely because of Rupert Lowe, obviously. Have UKIP or any of the smaller parties taken it seriously? No, because nobody cares. But anyway, on this point, he goes on to legal. Oh, I don't think anyone actually has the stones to deal with it. Sorry, but you're saying this after Reform have said that they're going to be ending ILR, they're going to make citizenship harder to get, they're going to take off benefits off all foreigners, and obviously on top of that you've got all the criminal stuff, because an awful lot of people who may be here legally or illegally are running a load of Turkish barbers and mini-marts that are obvious fronts for criminality. Sorry, but you're either not paying attention or being incredibly disingenuous. Again, this is why I do not like Charlie Downs and, well, that lot in the Zoomer often. Because they are literally incapable of being honest and they can only have 3 talking points that they can always come back to. Incredibly boring and frankly stupid people. Anyway, that's where that section is cut off, and the next part's all about the poppy and fighting for your country. And, well, long story short, Charlie Downs is on the side of, no, I wouldn't fight for the country because at the end of the day you'd be fighting for an elite that have absolutely ruined the Zoomer and millennial generation, which, yeah, I do agree with, but ultimately I'm very, very much on the Enoch Powell side of the argument, which is really ironic because all these people say that they love Enoch Powell but don't know a damn thing about what he actually thinks. In that, no, actually, you should fight for Britain even if the elites are terrible and even if you're fighting for a communist Britain, because at the end of the day it's the borders that define Britain and the people within it, rather than the ideology that is running the country at the time. Ideas transcend time and space. You cannot fight for nor can you destroy them. However, the country as it exists right now is physical and is defined and should be defended with all your might. I do not care if that even means Jeremy Corbyn or Zach Polanski are in charge. You join up the army or join in the war effort any way that you can, and if you don't, you are pathetic. But yeah, I wouldn't really expect anyone in this day and age who don't really form their own opinions just bleat others to understand that, but there we go. Right, with that I think that will do it for today's video. I'm shocked I actually kept this under an hour, so there you go. Right, if you enjoy what I do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member or leave a super chat or super thanks in any video or stream that I do. On top of that, in terms of shilling this week, Tuesday we have some Tosh Talks, Wednesday it's the gaming stream, Friday it's Wolves of Westminster, and I'm afraid I'm going to be postponing Laughing at the Guardian with some women because I will be away next weekend, so I can't do it. But back to regular programming after that. Right, with that, videos out as and when I can make them as well. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.